I see the Zoom room is filling up. Welcome to our latest edition of the virtual speaker series. If you'd like to let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from, you can drop that information in the chat. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, Caitlin from Elk County. Thanks for joining us. And I see Helen from State College. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to get started in just a moment. Good afternoon, Penn Staters, and thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's edition of the virtual speaker series titled A Short History of Feminist Utopia. Does it exist? Live closed captions are available for this event. You can access them by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom video window and then clicking Show Subtitle. You can also customize your caption view by clicking the stream text link posted in the chat. And we're live streaming today's presentation, which will be archived and available on our website after the event. Since Sir Thomas More wrote Utopia in 1516, naming a concept and inventing a literary genre simultaneously, utopian literature has explored many different scenarios for living a better life, if not the best of all possible worlds. Over the centuries, women have had their own ideas about what a utopia for them would look like, and how we all might think otherwise about gender roles. In this short history of the feminist utopia, you'll hear how feminism, even before it was called that, drove utopian imaginings of how women's lives could be otherwise. Our guest today is Dr. Jennifer Wagner-Lawlor. She's a professor of women's, gender, and sexuality studies. She is a multiple-time alumna of Yale University, where she studied 19th-century British literature, which eventually morphed into a career-long interest in utopianism. She has published 5 books and dozens of articles on 19th to 20th century literature. She is the former president of the Scholarly Society for Utopian Studies and just took over editorship of the journal Utopian Studies, which is published by Penn State University Press. In addition to her interest in utopianism, Dr. Wagner-Lawlor has worked in environmental humanities with a focus on cultural meanings of plastics, where she was a co-curator of the Palmer Museum's successful 2018 exhibition. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jennifer Wagner-Lawlor.
Hi, okay. There we are. Can everyone see me?
Yes, all's good.
Okay, good. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see you here and to talk about something that I've been interested in for, I'm afraid to say, 30 years, which is utopia, utopianism, and in particular, women's utopia. So 2 years ago, a literary commentator named Joe Davidson asked, what's happened to feminist utopia? Imaginative attempts to construct social orders defined by liberation and freedom have been overshadowed in the last decades by tales of horror, feminist horizons of expectation filled not with fundamentally better worlds, but instead the intensification of the worst tendencies of the present. And it's largely true. If I were to teach a feminist utopian writing class today, I would actually be teaching more like a feminist dystopian writing class. And part of the reason for that, which we'll get to, is Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. But let me jump way back and let me share my screen. I can. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the first slide and one of my favorite cartoons, which some of you may recognize because it comes from an old DC Comics cover. Back, all men are banned from this island by Aphrodite's law. So, okay, so this is, you'll notice this is an island, right? This is the first edition cover, or I guess actually the frontispiece of Sir Thomas More's Utopia, which he published in 1516. And it really did sort of start a genre of literature, sort of full blown. The word itself even, I'm going to jump to this slide for a second, is a word that he made up, right? So this word utopia is from Greek, and there's a kind of a pun in the word, which actually is really critical to understanding what utopia, feminist or otherwise, actually is, or what he thought of it as being. So the first thing you see the Greek ou with a, which means like non, or it's a kind of negative grammatical particle, and eu, which means good. We have the word eugenics, which comes from that. Those sounded exactly the same in classical Greek. And being, an aristocrat and in the court and all that, he knew Greek, as did anybody else who would have read this text. So he would have understood that his audience would recognize that if you say it out loud, it actually could mean either no place or good place. And so it has now been, over the centuries, utopia is now defined as a good place that is no place. And let me go back to this for a minute. And the reason that that's important is that a good place that's no place means that it's imaginary, right? And when I've noticed that some of the questions were asking me about sort of historical information, or where are there feminist utopias in the world? I would say nowhere, the answer to that. But from the way I study it, utopianism is something that's sort of virtual, right? It's a space that is, in your head. It's a creative space. It's a space where you can imagine things, dream things, and that becomes a very prominent kind of device in utopian narratives, where you can kind of dream about or imagine things as you think that they would be better in some way. Sir Thomas More wrote his Utopia as a kind of commentary on the court life that he was involved in. And I won't really go into that except to say that, for one thing, there was no money, and all the things that that his society viewed as important, like or valuable, I should say, like jewels or gold or anything precious, they treated like dirt in Utopia. So he was clearly making some kind of commentary about the way his society valued things and didn't value other things. You'll notice that on the sort of map, it is an island. There's actually a wall around the city. It was very well defended, so that nobody could get into it from outside. So from the beginning, there was this idea that there was a place where things were different and at least in some ways better. Part of the point of utopian literature, and I could include film narratives in this as well, is that you yourself as the reader or spectator get to sort of travel through this other place and judge for yourself. Like, is that better? Is that, I couldn't live there. I could live there. Wouldn't this be the perfect place? Or, well, this would be a nightmare for me, right? So utopian writing and narratives in general are sort of scenario building exercises. So it's the conditional aspect of utopia that complicates the idea of utopia much more than thinking about what is the perfect world. Let's define it, right? And because part of the point is you can't define it, right? How does utopia change? Well, it changes all the time. It changes every hour. It changes in every place. So and it's often said that one person's utopia is another person's nightmare. So Sir Thomas More kind of started this genre. On the right-hand side, he created an alphabet for it, and otherwise the rest of the text is written in Latin. So it's a different culture. They have a different language. As for women, there wasn't much interest in women per se there. It was really more interest in economics and governance, actually. But there was one thing that Sir Thomas More did that was kind of funny. There was a rule in Utopia that if a couple were to get married, they were required, both of them, the future husband and wife, to stand in front of each other naked. And the reason for that was that if either of the couple were repelled in some way by the physical appearance of the other, they could call off the marriage. So that was for both men and for women. So either one of them could opt out if they found the other one too disappointing, I guess, in physical appearance. The understanding being that, if you were repelled by your mate, it wasn't going to be a happy marriage. So there was Sir Thomas More, and as I say, he really started a kind of literary genre, like in one fell swoop. There's the neologism, but there are what we would now call utopian texts written before Utopia, right? Nobody would have called it that then, but in 1405, a court woman, Christine de Pizan, wrote the Book of the City of Ladies. And she was a French aristocrat Her husband worked in the court, and she was very, very highly educated, which was highly unusual at the time. And she wrote several things over the course of her lifetime that really sort of railed against contemporary misogyny. So this text is a kind of almost like a dream vision, and it starts out with her thinking about all the things that she's reading and all the things she's heard people say about how evil women are, how wicked they are, and so this is one of the things that one of the things she says. So the side of this book made me wonder how it happened that so many different men, and learned men among them, have been and are so inclined to express both in speaking and in their treatises and writings so many wicked insults about women and their behavior. Thinking deeply about these matters, I began to examine my character and conduct as a natural woman, and similarly, I considered other women whose company I frequently kept. To the best of my knowledge, no matter how long I confronted or dissected the problem, I could not see or realize how their claims could be true when compared to the natural behavior and character of women. And nonetheless, as it goes on, she becomes very depressed about this, and she decides that she herself, quote, is a vile creature whom, when God made woman, and I wondered how such a worthy artisan, God, could have designed to make such an abominable work, which, from what they say, is the vessel as well as the refuge and abode of every evil and vice. As I was thinking this, a great unhappiness and sadness welled up in my heart, for I detested myself and the entire feminine sex as though we were monstrosities in nature. And in my lament, I spoke these words, and she prays to God to understand why he made her in a female body, so that why she had to suffer by being a woman. At that point, she is visited, and this is the kind of dream vision part, by the figures of three noble women: Lady Reason, Lady Rectitude, Lady Justice, and they explain to her why her depression and self-loathing over being a woman is not just incorrect but illogical, and they encourage her to create a city for women, quote, where no one will reside except all ladies of fame and women worthy of praise, for the walls of the city will be closed to those women who lack virtue. And one of the critical tasks within this city will be women's education, right? And if there's one thing that consistently runs through women's utopian writing, it is the attention to women's education. Right? And what you're looking at here are original illuminated manuscript pages from the Book of the City of Ladies. There's only something like 22 of them in the whole world. So this is 1405, right? I mean, really, really early. And so these three kind of visionary ladies are explaining to her, like, philosophically and even, by sort of scientific, biological justifications for believing that women are not evil or wicked or inferior to men, but if they were to be able to live on their own without this sort of bad influence of negativity from the males in the world, that they could become much different people, right? And so you see this group of women, studying books and yeah. And so this is something that she hopes for, this sort of vision. So as I say, we call it a utopia now because it has a lot of the features of utopia. It is this sort of enclosed place, not an island, but you see these pictures of women together in a space where they are undisturbed, where they can study, where they can really get to know each other. And there's a kind of community solidarity, we might say today, among them. So one of the premises of a female utopia, which as I say, sort of was introduced in the 15th century, is a kind of thought experiment. And this is actually true of all utopias. They're thought experiments. So the question of what if, right? We always, in my field, we talk about the what if question. What if the world were different from the way it is? What if we were going to create a better world, a perfect world? How would we even go about it? What would we imagine? What aspects of society today could we change or improve to make a better place? And it was actually one of the best statements of this problem that I know of. It comes from John Stuart Mill, ironically. In 1869, he wrote a text called The Subjection of Women. And he wrote, I deny that anyone knows or can know the nature of the two sexes as long as they've only been seen in their present relation to one another. Until conditions of equality exist, no one can possibly assess the natural differences between women and men, distorted as they have been. What is natural to the two sexes can only be found out by allowing both to develop and use their faculties freely. We're still basically studying that today in women's studies. We talk about sexual difference, but underneath all that is beyond sort of the biological presentation of male and female. Is there any difference, right? And how can we know when we're from birth? We are kind of conditioned in ways that actually define who we are. Like, what would happen if all the pink and the blue were gone? What would happen if you tried to, and people have tried to do this, to raise a gender neutral child, right? So so this idea of are women and men different, or are they actually the same, is another sort of continuous theme. And a female utopia also includes a sense of community, right, in which women are recognized as fully human, intellectually equal, right, starting with the acceptance that women actually have intellects, which is not to be taken for granted. From Greek times, it was thought that women have smaller brains, therefore they're not as smart, etc. And that women are more than just their bodies, that they themselves are subjects and not just objects. In this community, they would be educationally equal, they would be morally equal, that women in general, all women, right, would be the best that they can be without outside sort of ideological notions of what a woman is or should be, or more negatively, what she isn't. Okay, so the next sort of real feminist utopia that comes along in literature is Sarah Scott's Millennium Hall from 1762. And this, you could see the country house there in the background. These are men whose carriage have broken down, and they have to find a place to fix their carriage and rest a little bit, and they end up in this house that is inhabited entirely by women, and three of them are sort of the leaders. These are all women who in one way or another have been extremely abused by the males in their lives, husbands, brothers, pimps, you name it. They've had terrible lives, but they manage to just sort of by chance, they meet each other and they scrape together enough money. I think one of them actually has money to buy this place, and they decide that it's going to be a place for women who, like them, have had lives of suffering. And woman who comes there is given a job to do. They are learning that, they have school, etc. And when the men come in, they see these women as very calm and very, composed, busy all the time. And what this sort of vision turns into is a sort of like an enlightened capitalism. Like the women all work, they weave, and they do other things. They sell these products to the villages around them, and all the profits come back into the community. Buy clothing, care for all the inhabitants, and all of these women report to these men that for them this is this idyllic place. They're safe. It really is in part a safe haven. They're safe. They want for nothing, and this is kind of for them, a perfect existence, and none of them have any intention of ever leaving. So that again, this idea of a kind of, go back to this for a second, self-enclosed, kind of hermetic society, right, where the outside world is essentially not welcome because they don't want any of those kind of strictures to be placed upon them again. Now I'm sort of jumping. Daring to Dream is a collection of utopian stories by US women, 1836 to 1919. And it's a kind of, it's an anthology basically of either short stories or excerpts of stories written by US women. And here's where we begin to see the political really begin to be expressed in these kinds of narratives. At least in the text that Carol Kessler chose, each writer is responding directly to a kind of political issue that is upsetting them, and that includes the whole suffrage movement is beginning to get started. The women they want the vote. They want to be able to share in governance. They want to be able to have work that is outside the home, that's meaningful to them. And you start to see this kind of what we would recognize as feminism, and so there's a lot of kind of political resistance that's happening. Sometimes in some of the stories, these women travel to the future and they see this other world. One takes place in New York City in the mid 1800s. They're suddenly, transported in a dream to New York City in the 21st century, and they get this vision, right? They see this equality. They see how women's lives have changed over the century, and then they wake up, right, and then start telling other people about what they've seen, about what's possible. And that's also a very kind of standard motif in utopian texts. Somebody visits someplace else, they see this other world, that they see how things are done elsewhere. Some things, of course, seem very strange, but other things seem very hospitable to them. And then they wake up, they're back home, but they want to start telling people. So this is the kind of political momentum that utopian texts start to push to the forefront. That the reader is kind of engaged in this process of learning about how else things could be, and hopefully, I think when somebody asked, whether whether utopia changes anything, that's a question that these writers ask too, and so part of the way they build in this, like, this question of this is how things might be, can we change it to that, is to have this visitor to the utopia go back to where they came from and start telling other people, with the idea of explaining, this is how they do it there. Why can't we do it there like that? One of the most famous, and one of my favorite stories is actually pretty funny. There's a city in the eastern U.S., and they're starting to kind of militate for voting rights and for legal equality, and they're getting nowhere with that. And the women decide to basically go on strike. And even worse, they actually just pick up and go. So they leave en masse from their homes, they leave the husbands, they take the kids, and they go and set up a community somewhere else, and refuse to come home until the men agree that they will have these demands met. And so, the men, meanwhile, like, more time goes by, the houses start falling apart. I mean, it's very kind of, sexist in that way. The men are incapable of taking care of the household. They're also, of course, sexually frustrated, and they like beg these women to come back. But they hold out until they get the political power that they want, and some of the social power. Now, Herland is part of it, is included in the Daring to Dream anthology, but Herland is one of the most famous feminist utopian texts. It was published in 1915, and it is a community that is it was separated from men from regular society kind of by accident, like an earthquake or something. And a lot of the men died off from wars and things. The women were left, and they suddenly gained the ability to reproduce amongst themselves. I mean, and what I mean is they acquire the capability of parthenogenesis, like that, and a lot of animals have this capacity where they are, well, in lower animals, they have sort of two sexes at once, right? So they can inseminate themselves and produce offspring. So in Herland, they acquire this capacity to give birth to children without sexual intercourse, and the children are all girls. So they have been this way for something like 2,000 years. And so they've developed, this is sort of what John Stuart Mill was imagining. Like, what if there were a community of women who could live for a very extended period of time and create their own culture. So these are quotes from Herland. The visitors themselves are men. Oh, I can see I'm going to hurry up in my little history here. And they're not expecting to see a kind of civilized country out from a group of women. But look, why, this is a civilized country, I protested. There must be men. And later in the text, one of the women, the leaders, is explaining to them, there's only in social relations that we are human. To be human, women must share in the totality of humanity's common life. Women forced to lead restricted lives retard all human progress. Growth of organism, the individual or social body requires use of all our powers in 4 areas: physical, intellectual, spiritual, and social. So as time has gone by, say from Millennium Paul, and especially, in Europe, in the US and Britain, where a lot of these texts are getting written, more political themes come in: voting rights, equality before the law, a recognition that motherhood is not some kind of minor profession, but a critical part of the social order and should be valued just as highly as anything else anybody might do. So the question of women's labor, not just in childbirth, but women in the labor force, comes to be a theme. And in general, women's agency. How can women become agents of change? How can they change those things about society that they, as women, see are imperfect? Okay. Run through some things here. Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. She's an author that probably some of you have heard of. And Le Guin is a science fiction writer. The main thing, one of the texts that sort of best showed her thought experiment into utopianism was The Left Hand of Darkness, which came out in 1969. And it began as a thought experiment. And so she actually writes, and she recalls later on with this book, that I eliminated gender to find out what was left. Whatever was left would be presumably simply human. Kind of echoes the quote from Herland in a way. It would define the area that is shared by both men and women alike. And so the novel goes on to dismantle these sort of fictions of gender dualism that we all still operate with. She says, or actually one of the characters says, there's no division of humanity into strong and weak halves, protective and protected, dominant, submissive, owner, chattel, active, passive. In fact, the whole tendency to dualism that pervades human thinking may be lessened or changed. I'm sorry, that was Le Guin herself. So she, as J.S. Mill suggested, she wants to sort of take out what was left, right? Or rather, take out gender and see what was left. And there's one character who kind of goes through this this conversion of sorts. The people on the planet that they're on. We've moved from islands to planets by this time. Is kind of a little disgusted by the inhabitants because they're actually both male and female. They kind of go through cycles of being one and the other. And so this character, this visitor, after taking a kind of forced survival journey with this one inhabitant of the planet, says finally, and I saw then again and for good what I'd always been afraid to see, and I pretended not to see in him, that he was a woman as well as a man. What I was left with was at last acceptance as he was. So Le Guin creates these kinds of scenes because, as she says, she wants to open the door to imagination and the possibility of things being other than they are. Sex and sexuality offer a tremendous playground, and it doesn't hurt to have, doesn't do any harm to have people's ideas shook up. Okay, I can see I'm going to have to race forward. We have a kind of what's usually called the golden age of feminist utopianism, starting in about 1970, which is really when feminist movements in America began to heat up. So not surprisingly, there's always a connection to reality. This is from Toni Morrison. Women's rights is not only an abstraction, a cause, it's also a personal affair. It's not only about us, it's also about me and you. One of the kind of hallmark statements of feminist movement in the 70s and 80s was the personal is political. And that's what she's getting at there. These are two more really great books. And then there's The Handmaid's Tale, which sort of seemed to stop the idea of the possibility of women's utopia in its tracks. In a way, we're still there, right? So, the kind of revival of The Handmaid's Tale in popular culture, right? That was written in 1985, right? And here we get the Hulu series, starting a series much more overtly violent than we tend to see in the book. But we also see protesters dressed as handmaids, right? This is outside the Supreme Court in 2020. This one is last week in Tel Aviv, again protesting the possibility that the courts in Israel will be weakened by the Netanyahu government. So this idea of the handmaids has become larger than it was, and so as we get to modern times and today, we have this idea the personal is political. The racial dynamics start to come through, not so much in Atwood, but in more contemporary works. We have this motif of like imprisonment or incarceration of women, right? That they're finding or trying to find ways, often unsuccessfully, to break out of. A very dystopian sense of the future, that things are getting worse rather than better. The battle of the sexes is sort of almost literal. And the settings of these, rather than these utopian, beautiful landscapes that we might see in, say, Herland, we have, we're sent to places that are post-apocalypse. Almost always there's been some kind of nuclear disaster, or environmental issues have led to a precipitous drop in the birth rate, and women then become in demand as a kind of natural resource. And I guess I'm going to have to stop here. But these are the list of books, there's probably more of them, that I call sort of legacy of Handmaid's Tale books. They all are marketed, in fact, like on the back cover, as contemporary, a Handmaid's Tale for our contemporary times. But they're all very much like the Handmaid's Tale. Their women are second or third class citizens. They're imprisoned, or they're being chased after or hunted, and I've been really kind of disturbed by this because we don't seem to be getting anywhere. So we're starting to, but you can see this in 2020, 2019. We seem to be at this kind of standstill when it comes to the idea of feminist utopianism. So, okay, I'm going to stop there because I know, being a professor, I've talked too long, and
we have some questions coming in.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some of them. Did the feminist movement in the 1950s through 1980s advance the actualization of utopia for women?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly the way it seems like the way in which things have been able to change most successfully has been through legal measures, right? So, I mean, really throughout that time, from the 50s, you have voting rights and civil rights happening. Women's rights and civil rights have always been very closely tied together. So I think the political forces are where that's happened most successfully.
So Gail is asking, hoping that this focuses on the cultural norms of America and Europe. What external factors influence the drive for redefinition?
I think, I've sort of suggested along the way that utopian texts are always tied to reality. I mean, the idea that an author might have for a utopian narrative comes out of the world she's living in. So that shifts, right? So the fact that I just showed you this whole big cluster of texts that kind of repeat The Handmaid's Tale, right? that tells us something, right? And people are reading these novels. They've all sold well, right? That women are still worried about being considered, kind of a vessel for having kids, and that's not to say that feminists are anti-kids, because they're not, but more like, why is the single thing that women must do is have children, right? And and now with the Supreme Court decision, it seems the handmaids are coming out of the woodwork to think about that. So I would say the external influence is politics, in a word, right?
Yeah. So a question that I would have, given all the literature that has popped up recently, you had about a dozen books that you just showed up. That kind of content, I would imagine, is consumed by people who are interested in it. And so how do those books, how does it attempt to change like the situation, the environment, the overall narrative, with people who may not be consuming, that type of content? Well, ultimately, like, how does this trickle into mainstream society?
I would say through the movies more than anything else, through television. I mean, The Handmaid's Tale is the absolutely perfect example. But even a movie like Alien, right, ends up being about mothers and children in a bizarre way. Right? The alien creature is protecting its young. Right? So I think it makes these days. It makes its way through popular culture, through social media, through TV, and I didn't point out that a lot of these are also science fiction novels. So that is another way that these ideas get into the mainstream, because you have science fiction novels taking place on other planets and other dimensions altogether, and the intention is the same, to kind of bring us out of where we are, the world we know, and insert us into a world that we don't know, where some things are, especially in the case of science fiction, might be worse, but some things might be better. And so it's sort of like planting an idea, planting a seed, but it's following it's following artists' sense of where political life is going, where social life is going, and how that's going to affect individuals who don't have the kind of social power that, say, people in Washington, D.C. have.
So that's all the time that we have for today.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Dr. Jennifer Wagner-Lawlor for joining us and for sharing the good work that you're doing here at Penn State. I also want to thank all of you who have tuned in to today's virtual speaker session. As a reminder, you can view a full listing of all of our events online and in person at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you again, and for all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are
Penn State.